this felt like Andrew Wiggins Day. This was it. We talk later in this podcast about Hall of Famers, and there's a whole Andrew Wiggins session there. This was probably the most important basketball game he's ever played. This was the most impressed I've been by him in a basketball game. And it's hard not to say that this was one of the most important trades of the last 10 years when you think they got a guy who's a valuable starter for them in a playoff series. They're about to make the finals, it looks like. And they get the Kuminga pick for a guy, Russell, that you and I don't really like that much.
Well, we know the part that you're going to hear later that was taped before the game that once I made a very strong anti-Wiggins Hall of Fame argument, which I still think is somewhat strong, he was going to go off tonight. So that's just, like, as soon as we got done, I was like, he's going to have 40.
You inspired him. And he had a poster dunk, too. He dunked on Luka. The rare, they reversed the call.
I couldn't believe it. I figured they would just go with his off arm, and Luka sold it a little bit. But I was just happy for just, if you believe in anything in life, that should be 2 points.
Yeah. That's like a spirit of the game. Are you surprised? Well, let's talk about Wiggins first. There's that what if with him in 2014 where Cleveland has the first pick, but all of a sudden LeBron's coming back to Cleveland. And I remember there's a piece of my Grantland archives about this, about me wondering if it made sense to actually keep Wiggins and for LeBron to use the next couple of years to kind of, they had a young roster. They had Kyrie. Try to train Wiggins basically to be his Pippen, to be his athletic sidekick, defender, doesn't need to, have the ball like LeBron does and stuff like that. But they traded him obviously to Minnesota and his career went a different direction. He always put up stats. But when I saw a game like tonight, it makes me think like, let's say they just keep him for a year to see if they like him. Or let's say Kevin Love isn't sitting there. They just don't have a trade and they're like, let's take Wiggins and we'll just keep him. Do you think his career's different?
I hear this a lot. People talk about quarterbacks a lot, like, bad coaching staff, they change the coordinator. Usually if they're changing the coordinator so much, it's because you're not playing well. I'm not as big of a believer on that there's some alternative choose your own adventure life path as a basketball player for Andrew Wiggins. I think the problems for him coming out of Kansas, whenever we look at any draft prospect, you go, hey, if it works out, it's going to be because it's his elite athleticism. He'll develop more as a shooter. I remember thinking at some point with him, even talking to teams, they go, at the very worst, you're going to get this elite defensive player because of his length, size, and athleticism. And for a very large chunk of his career, he's been an incredibly disappointing defensive player. So, I don't know that his personality would have changed all of a sudden. I just don't. I mean, I'm sure other people would argue it, but I mean, I think what's so frustrating about him is that he should be a really consistently great basketball player. I'm not talking about like one of the all-time greats, but somebody that you depend upon as opposed to being surprised when he plays like this tonight. But I think that's his career.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of guys like that over the years. And I think...
Do you think it'd be different for him if he started in Cleveland and it was just...
I do think sometimes, especially with basketball, that if you end up in a really good situation and you end up with the right person next to you, it can shift. I think your destiny can shift a little bit. I also believe that if you have the skill set and the personality that he had and you just go to the Minnesota wasteland and basically your one highlight was the year Jimmy Butler was there and all he did was MF you and your teammates for the entire year he was there and talk about what you guys didn't have. And then he leaves, he blows his way out of there. And there was a stigma to him. At the same time, you and I have talked about how frustrating he's been. I don't know how many times on this pod. He's the prototypical example of, I was at the game and I forgot you were out there. When we talked about the All-Star team for that, it's like, whoa, you were out there for the whole third quarter? I didn't even notice.
Go ahead.
But no, it's just, I think that's been the frustrating thing about him. But at the same time, I do feel like until he got to Golden State, I would say his career was kind of a bad beat. It was the wrong type of guy to go the wrong type of situation that he went to. And he was putting up stats. That's the thing. You go through like every year, he was like pretty much 17 to 22 points a year. And he was pretty durable. So I think from the Warriors making a bet that they could probably pull the best possible pieces out of him was a pretty smart bet. We've seen teams do that before with the high pedigree lottery guys,
Especially when you go to Golden State, because your life's going to be that much easier. I remember talking to a team source about it, and it's just a really simple basketball observation. This guy, with all the movement, with all of the freedom that you'll have, because of all the attention that's going to be on Steph, and then at the time, what was thought to be prime Clay, and then Draymond's playmaking. Like, this is incredible. You're going to be what at worst, I guess, with the most pressure on you, you'd be the fourth most important player on the team. And, there's been moments where he might not even be the fifth most important player on this team, depending on what Poole's done or, certain moments like what Looney did in game 2. So I kind of always, a lot of people disagree with me on this, but I actually feel stronger and stronger about this as I get older because it applies to sports as much as it does to people. Like when somebody has a certain personality and then we ask, like, why would this guy do this? You're like, well, that's who he is. Like, he does these things because this is who he is and these are the decisions that he makes. So whenever we talk about athletes and you'll be like, oh, I wonder why he's like this. Like, yeah, but some people just kind of have that personality. Like one of my least favorite comps that I'll ever hear is when people say, well, why can't you just build an offense for Ben Simmons like you did Giannis? You're like, have you watched either of those players play? Do you understand anything about their personalities? Do you understand the gap between the way they see competition? Like, I don't care about the size and the skills and these things and the limitations both have from the outside. Giannis is a completely different person. His DNA, his mental makeup is completely different. Ben Simmons is never going to be that. So don't ask for it. And I...
like my guy, Jabari Smith.
Who? Jabari?
My guy, Jabari. I think he has it.
You think he has the personality for it?
I do. I think he has the personality to be like, every year I'm going to get better at this. I'm going to keep working until I get to this point, until I add this. That's why I think he should be number 1 pick.
But you're right about
put the work in.
The Wiggins part. Like, he had 24 a game one season. And it would always be like, one season he came back, he hit like 37 from 3 for the first half of the season. You're like, oh, he's figuring it out. He's figuring it out. And then, remember Doris Burke, who's really nice to players? Because when you have that gig, you kind of have to be positive all the time. The NBA doesn't want you dumping on players and dumping on
I don't know
product.
if you have to call people by their first names, but I agree.
Anyway, she called him out in a way that I was like, whoa. But I was proud of her because it was accurate. And it was, it's almost like when Van Gundy every now and then, Jeff will kind of let somebody have it. I think it was a Cam Reddish. And you go, I wonder where this is coming from, So some guys are just not wired the right way. And I look at tonight as an awesome part of the story, but also a confirmation of how frustrating he is as a player because he should have been better.
He reminds me, there's certain guys in the past who I think had more talent than whatever the final product was. And in some cases, they had issues off the court. I think Kenny Anderson is a good example of that. But like big dog, Glenn Robinson, right? He was number 1 pick. He was a career 20.7 a game. He was basically a guaranteed 21, 22 a game. And it didn't seem like he didn't seem like somebody who'd be that awesome to play with. And then in the 2001 playoffs with that Ray Allen team, he would have moments and it was like, oh, this is big dog. This is like the guarantee too. But he just could never have the consistency to be very good. He could do his one thing. He never really got better. He kind of was, I don't really feel like he evolved as a player over the years. Wiggins, the thing with him that I think has evolved is I didn't think the hoops IQ was there like this. Like to play on this team, this is like being, I don't know, like in one of those Chris Guest or like Curb Your Enthusiasm, where it's like, if you're going to be on that show, you have to have some ad-lib skills.
That's good. Yeah.
You can't just be like, show me the cue cards and I'll just read what's on there. I studied that. Wait, why are you doing that? I wasn't prepared for this. You really have to be pretty fluent. And I think the way he's fit into that, I did not expect.